connect with us on social media.
Hi, I'm Rev.Jessie Brandon, and I'm a life cycle celebrant as well as an ordained metaphysical minister, and you're watching Epiphanies, where I get to bring my two loves together, books and people. And with me here today is Jennifer Armstrong-Lehman, and she is a lifelong student of politics. She holds both a bachelor's and a master's degree in political science from Wilfrid Laurier University. And after graduation, she joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade as a Foreign Service Officer, working in the Southeast Asia Division and the Commonwealth Division. Jennifer was a member of Canada's delegation to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 2002, and then was posted to the Canadian mission to the United States in New York in 2002 and 2003. Now, since moving to Barrie in 2003, Jennifer has found other ways to feed her interest in politics. She's taught courses in Canadian government, human rights, and international relations at Georgian College. She's also a guest speaker on women's participation in politics, the United Nations, the Landmine Treaty, and the current situation in Syria. She has recently founded the nonpartisan group Politics for Women, aimed at encouraging more women to become involved in politics at all levels. In between volunteering on various political campaigns, Jennifer has volunteered for a variety of community organizations, including the Kiwanis Club of Barrie, the McLaren Arts Centre, Hospice Simcoe, Gilda's Club, Onstage Performance Group, which is how I know you, and the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. She's also an active supporter of the Canadian Armed Forces and was recently appointed the Honorary Colonel for Canadian Forces Base Borden. Now, Jen, you're the first woman to have achieved that. Is that not correct?
For the whole of Base Borden, yes.
The whole of Base Borden, that's what I thought. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and the book that you chose to bring to us today is called Teardown, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up.
Absolutely.
And the author is Dave Meslin. So, I don't know a thing about politics. I've done
Good, you're my favorite person.
All right, cool. So this is the long overdue Owner's and Operator's Guide to a Healthy Democracy, brimming with creative strategies. It's down to earth, doable manual to get ourselves out of the toxic, non-user friendly morass we call Canadian politics. Wow.
Absolutely.
Teach me.
So it's been interesting. When you asked me about whether or not I'd had a book that led to an epiphany, I sort of thought about it and I thought, I actually had an epiphany that led me to a book. And that's kind of where I am. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a friend of mine who called me up and said, okay, so there's this election going on and I just got asked to become a member of a party and I don't even know what that means. So I said, okay, well, let's go for coffee. And we sat down for about 45 minutes to an hour, and I walked her through the whole process. I explained how parties are involved in elections. I explained why people look for members to become part of the party system, the whole process from someone who's just running for nomination all the way through to, forming government. Took a while, but we had some fun with it. And I asked her afterwards, I said, so, I hope you don't mind me asking this because you're a grown woman, well-educated, intelligent, interested in the world. How did you not know this? And she kind of looked at me and said, well, when would I have learned? I thought that was the epiphany, right? That was I've spent 5 years, 6 years of my life in education, learning about this system and learning about it from the ground up, from local government to provincial governments to federal to international, instilling myself in this process. And then applying it when I got out of it, both as a member of the bureaucracy with the Canadian Foreign Service and as volunteers through the process. Of course I know it. And of course, unless you've been involved with it like that, how would you know it?
Exactly.
And when you're an adult, where do you go for that information that isn't automatically going to be biased towards a particular issue or a particular party? And I was like, okay, I can do something about that.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I can maybe I can bring this. And so I started working with my friend and with some other sort of colleagues and saying, okay, how do I pull this forward to the adult level? Because by that point I'd been teaching some political courses at Georgia in college for first-year students, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
How do I bring that to the adults? Because I look around and I see so many people who are writing politics off and dismissing it and being angry about it, but not reconnecting to it.
Yeah.
And maybe part of the problem is that they just don't know how, and they don't know where to start.
Right.
And isn't that a frustrating moment to think, this is making me crazy, but I don't know how to fix it?
Yeah.
Right? Any part of our life.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So I started working. We did a workshop just about a year before the last municipal election, sort of encourage people to understand the process. I invited lots of guest speakers to come in and talk about their experiences at all levels of the political process. So as a volunteer, as a candidate, as a campaign manager, how did that all work? How did it all look? And out of that, about 6 or 8 candidates ended up running for local government, both as for councillor or for school trustee, all that kind of sort of thing. And some of them just got involved and said, you know what, I finally volunteered and I finally went out and I started seeing what this was all about. So then I started looking for more information. Okay, how do I build on this? How do I grow this? And that's when I came across Dave Meslin's book. And Dave Meslin is from Toronto and has done a huge amount of work as an activist, as an organizer, involved with local political parties as well. So he really comes to it with a huge wealth of knowledge about how it works, and more importantly, how it doesn't work, and how it's broken, and then how do we fix it? And that's what this book is all about.
Oh, very cool. So is there something that you can read to me as a layperson that would encourage me to pursue knowledge about the political system?
So I think what's important for Dave Meslin anyway, and in this book in particular, and he has a TED Talk if you want to go online and find that one, it's great, about apathy. And that's what he really focuses on, is that there's this huge sense of apathy in our citizenry because they feel like they can't have any influence on the political system. And he points out that it's kind of true, but it also can be fixed. So he points out that he's been a community organizer, it says here, a campaign strategist, journalist, lobbyist, fundraiser, and partisan staffer. He's been every angle of the political ecosystem, as he calls it. And there's 2 things he's learned. First, change is possible, and regular people can have an impact. But second, change is much harder than it should be because the system is indeed rigged against ordinary people.
I always thought so.
And it's not necessarily always a choice by politicians or staffers or backroom people to make it rigged. Some of it is just structural, and some of it is a lack of knowledge, right?
Okay.
If you look at trying to, for example, I don't know, you want to climb a cliff, right? And you walk up to the cliff and you start climbing, you're probably going to fall down. If you've had no experience, no education, you have no support structure to help you climb that cliff. But if you go out there and you have a guide, or you have a climbing rig attached to you, and you have pitons and the little, hooks and everything that you need to climb, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to climb the cliff. And so if you look at politics like that as something that is difficult, shouldn't be, but is, and yet if we educate ourselves, if we inform ourselves, if we connect ourselves into the system, we can learn how to climb the cliff, but then we can also carve a path for others and make it easier to connect.
That's interesting because about 10 years ago I said that I wanted to run for city council, and then I began to look around and watch people who were doing it, and I thought, there is so much work you have to do, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. So, it was on the bucket list, and I just kind of ran a line through it because I thought, I don't even know how to begin.
Yep.
And who knows me? How do I get people to know me? And what's my stand? What do I want for my city?
Yep.
So anyway, so how would you help somebody like me?
I think the first thing I would do is to sit down, and I've done this for people, and I do this with my Pints and Politics discussions that we run as well with Politics for Women, is to just talk about the system and give you a safe place to ask those questions.
Right.
Because isn't the scariest thing about not knowing something admitting that you don't know it?
Exactly.
Right? I'm a grown woman. I should know these things.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask someone how does the prime minister get to be prime minister? That's a scary question.
Right.
I had a student of mine come up to me after about 4 weeks of a Canadian politics course and say, so how did the prime minister get to be prime minister? And I looked at her and I went, so do you mean like, what did he do beforehand to sort of prepare himself to become prime minister? Like, what's his background? She said, no, how does he actually get voted in? And this is a girl who'd taken civics, who had spent a month in my Canadian politics class, and it never occurred to me that that piece of information had been missing.
I took political science in university. When Laurentian came to town, I was in the pilot class. And the only word I remember is, and I'll probably not even say it right, is hegemony.
Yep.
And I still don't know what it means. So, and believe me, I've Googled it, I've looked in the dictionary, and I don't understand it.
And that's the challenge if you try and learn something on your own. The sources of information sometimes do need to be interpreted, right? They need to be provided to you in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So analogies need, that's the best about having a good teacher, a good instructor when you're learning something new, is having someone who can understand where you're coming from and then bring you to the knowledge that you want in a way that makes sense to you, to provide the analogies that make sense. So one of the biggest things I do when I talk to my students is I talk to them about, well, what do you do every day? Like, what are you interested in? And then try use that to then relate politics back to them. The analogy I often use is, because first-year university students, first-year college students, they're usually, oh, politics is boring, and it's no use to me, and I don't want to take it, and why do I have to take it? And I'm like, okay, politics is like sports, okay? I don't particularly enjoy watching sports. I'll go out and play some with my kid, or I'll have some fun with friends, but I don't particularly like watching sports. And I don't like watching on TV or listening on the radio because generally, regardless of the sport, I don't know who the teams are. I don't know who the players are. I kind of know the rules, but when they start getting into things like in hockey icing or offsides and other sports, I don't know what that means, so it doesn't make sense to me. So I go and do something else.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing in politics. If no one has ever explained to you the teams, and you don't know the players very well, and people are talking about weird rules that you've never heard of, like prorogation or hegemony or other terms that make no sense, well, of course you're going to flip it off and go find something else. It doesn't make sense to you. And how does it, if it doesn't make sense, why would you spend your time just listening to these words over and over again? It's like trying to learn a new language by just listening to someone speaking in it and never getting a translation.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I voted Liberal for years because of the first Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau. My father adored him, and so we watched it all the time. And the only thing that I remember is when, and again, I may have this wrong, but I believe that he called martial law when Laporte was kidnapped and killed.
Yeah.
Was it martial law?
It's not martial law, but it's something similar. It was an act that was passed in order to ensure the safety of Quebec and people in Quebec at the time. But
right. And like I say, I am aware of that moment in history.
The "Just watch me." Do you remember that line?
Yeah,
that's the one that everybody remembers, right? He stands there, so you're not seriously going to do this, asks the reporter, and he says, "Just watch me."
Yeah.
And he walks off.
Yeah.
Right? That's that moment in time.
Yeah.
But the context behind that and understanding why he did it or what that meant to Quebec and to the people in Quebec and the ramifications of it long term are all things that are kind of lost in the mists of history unless you've studied it and read about it or have someone who can sit down and walk you through that.
Yeah. And you see, I'd actually like to know that kind of stuff. I love history. I mean, does anybody today know why it's the Pearson Airport? Do they even know who that is? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that would be really cool. I also know that when it happened when I was in university, I was 45 and I was, sort of one of the oldest in the class and all of, and I had a young child and so forth. So all of that kept me from being able to dig in and really ask the questions that I had. And so now I'd be interested, politics for women, is that open to anybody?
Absolutely. So we had for a while, we were meeting about once a month. We called it Pints and Politics, and we met at a couple of different places downtown Barrie to just sort of have it open. This is a safe, nonpartisan, forgiving place to ask any questions you want. And the first couple of times we did it, we just invited women, and we asked it to be just kept to women. And then a couple of times we've done recently, we've opened it up to pretty much anyone who wants to come in. Because we've recognized that although there are, in many cases, very specific structural and lifestyle challenges for women to get involved in politics, that lack of knowledge and that fear about asking questions extends to men as well. And so being able to offer that space for anyone to come in and ask those questions, and to be provided with at least thoughtful and as nonpartisan as I possibly can be answers, and to give them sort of both sides or multiple sides to an issue or to a position and say, this is what's going on, and now you get to make the choice.
Very cool. So what else can you tell me in this book that will help people to understand how can we identify? I mean, we all know that the system is broken, but how can we identify an issue and work to changing that, or find out, is it changeable? Like, does that book explain that?
He does at times. I think it's more about pointing out, in many cases, it's about pointing out why we feel the way we do, right? Why are we so apathetic about politics? How have we gotten to this point, right? And then pointing out how we got there, then recommending some changes that we can make to bring us back. And there are changes that we can do as individuals. There's changes that local governments can do as cities or townships or counties, for that matter. Things that provincial levels of government can do and MPPs can, and then things that the federal government and MPs can do as well. So he kind of breaks it down into different chapters as to those different areas. But I think right now what's really interesting to look at is that idea of parties and partisanship, because I think a lot of what people are really upset about when it comes to politics is the way in which our politicians, especially party-based politicians, are communicating to each other and to us as citizens. And so the challenge becomes, how do we get past that sense of incivility and anger and aggressiveness that seems to come out of the political party system right now? And the one thing he says, and it's one thing that resonates with me quite a bit, is to become a member of a party.
Really?
Yes.
See, I have avoided that like the plague. I am, I guess, officially a member of a particular party,
Right.
but I avoid their phone calls, and I don't go to any of the rallies or anything like that. I believe in what I know of their platform.
Yeah.
But I am not the sort of person, like, I could go and listen and watch, but I don't understand.
Yeah.
So
he points out in one of his chapters called "It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want to," which I love. He says, he points out all of these problems within political parties and the ways that they take the power away from their elected officials and centralize it, and all of the challenges therein, and talks about the incivility and the all that anger that comes out and the way it's moving. And he says, so these are all problems, obviously. And if we want to reboot our political parties, there's clearly a lot of work to be done, he says. How do we transform institutions that have become steeped in cynicism, fear, and risk aversion? If you want to be a part of that change, the first step is simple: join a party. That doesn't mean you have to become a fiercely partisan, banner-waving lunatic. It just means that you support the general values of a party and want to be part of shaping that party's platform, strategy, team, and future. You can even be a member of a party while still collaborating with like-minded people from other parties. Although the membership of a regular party probably won't agree with you on that, but it's true. But if you don't sign up as a member, then you can't affect change from within.
that's very true. You can't sit on the sidelines and hope to score the winning goal, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important is and that's the snowball of apathy, he calls it at one point, which is we don't like the way our parties are running, we don't like the way our government is moving, and it pushes us away. So we disengage further. And then they keep going on the same path they're going, and that disengages us further. And so we end up in this snowball of apathy where our politicians don't really trust the masses anymore because they don't know them and don't hear them and are worried about, shifting stuff away from the center of power. And the citizenry don't trust their politicians anymore because of where they're going, and they're not feeling that they're being listened to.
Right.
And then even worse, we end up not trusting each other, and we lose our faith in each other. And part of that is the way that we debate online and with each other in person. And I think not only be a member of a party and get engaged and try and change it from within, but take a good hard look at yourself and your friends and the people you talk to and the way you talk to them. And can you change it there? So when someone says something on Twitter or Facebook or some social media or an article in the newspaper and you disagree with them, do you call them an idiot and, put them out as, not worth listening to? Or do you go, okay, I disagree with you. Help me understand why you think the way you do.
That is so interesting because I rarely read this stuff, but I happen to see an opinion expressed by someone on Facebook, and they were someone that I wouldn't say that I trusted their opinion, but I trusted their experience enough to know that they weren't just blowing smoke.
Right.
And someone else got involved in the conversation. There was several people, but I don't know. I hope this doesn't cause any problems. But he started referring to Justin Trudeau as a turd, and so people then began saying to him, like, "Why would you use that language? That doesn't say anything." And then the argument became about this guy's way of expressing himself. Well, granted, it wasn't exactly, it was pretty generic. Why do you feel that way about him? But nobody asked him that, which I've just realized from what you said, that that's what happened. And it became a kind of, to me, a couple of the people remained civil and gentlemanly, but it was with disdain almost. And it just became like I was out. I read through a couple of pages of this going back and forth, and I thought, that right there is why, A, I don't like social media, and B, I don't like politics, because I didn't understand anything about what they were saying, but I could feel the tension and the anger and the incivility. Is that the right word? Yeah,
absolutely.
Happening. And I thought, give me back Janice Laking, who just sat and knit while she listened to everybody. She was the powerhouse to me. So, that's the only level of politics I've ever paid attention to. And then I lost my taste for that after a while too.
Which is understandable, right? And that's the challenge here is to encourage us to be our best selves, right? Online, in person, in the council chambers, in the chamber of House of Commons, all of those things, to be our best and to encourage our elected officials and the staff and the people around them to be their best person themselves, right? And so not to insult them when you disagree with them, but to try and understand why they got to where they got. Because I may never agree with you, but if I can understand where you're coming from, then I can at least say, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm still not going to follow you that way, but I understand why you're making those choices.
Yeah.
I just disagree with you as to what the cause of the problem is, and so I'm going to go off this way. And maybe with me explaining to you why I'm where I am, you may come to agree with me, or maybe we can find a common point. Who knows?
Yeah. So do you think, and then this is a big question, do you think that what we're seeing play out on the political landscape is really a reflection of how we're treating each other
I think
day to day?
I think it's cyclical. I think it's sort of, each piece reinforces the other. Right? And I think Dave Meslin makes a lot of really good points in here about how the structure of the political system reinforces and supports that aggression and antagonism that exists. I mean, you look just at the physical structure of the chamber of the House of Commons, for instance. It's the government party on one side and the opposition party on the other side. At first, it's called the opposition, right? Now, it is Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and their point is to try and find problems or flaws in what the government is doing, but the purpose is to make it better, not simply to criticize for criticism's sake. But when you have a room where you split the two teams into either side, and you make them stare at each other and speak to each other across this alleyway that is an inch longer than two swords lengths so that swords cannot cross. That's the tradition. That's where it's come from. how do you create a cooperative, approachable feeling culture in a room that is designed to separate and distinguish between two sides?
Yeah, because it's set up for adversaries.
Absolutely.
And
you look at some of the other chambers in the parliaments around Canada, and that's not always the same. And certainly in the international community, lots of governments don't have that. You even think of how you sit them. You could leave the room the same. It's our tradition, we'll leave the room the same. But what if we didn't put all of the Conservative Party together and all of the Liberal Party together and all of the NDP Party together?
Yeah, what if they had to sit beside somebody that they disagreed with, but they had to remain civil? What an interesting concept.
What if we put them alphabetically by last name? What if we put them by region? So geographically, you're sitting with everybody else from your area. Now, in many cases, that may be that you're all surrounded by the same party anyway, because that tends to happen. But wouldn't that be different?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be unusual? That now it's not about whether or not you're sitting behind your leader and showing your support for your leader. What if now it's about who's sitting next to you and, oh, hang on a second, you're on the same committee as I am. Maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah.
And you're walking out together and you're walking in together, and that changes, right?
Yeah. That's so fascinating.
And that's what I loved about this book, was there's so many little changes that wouldn't be a big deal, wouldn't require a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly gets into the big changes as well. He talks about changing the electoral system completely, and how the actual system we have right now, the first past the post, or plurality system as we call it in the political science circles, is actually not really designed to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and represented in the outcome of an election. And so he recommends other versions of electoral systems that we can use, and he explains them in good, solid detail, but accessible detail, not in, academic ways that are kind of, you have to know a whole bunch before you can interpret.
Yeah.
He provides it as here's the detail, and I'm going to go slowly, and it's all good.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, because I actually feel excited about the possibility of politics being different. Yeah. Now, I just want to quickly touch on, you're the honorary colonel of Base Borden. In 10 words or less, how's that going?
Fantastic.
Yeah?
I absolutely love it. This is a great opportunity to act as a liaison, as an ambassador between the base and the community, to help the community learn more about the base and the Canadian Armed Forces members that are there, and the way that they live and play in the community and work on Base Borden, and just to provide greater knowledge and education on that side of things. I love it so far.
That's really fabulous, because I remember being a teenager in this town and watching the guys come in from Base Borden and thinking, oh yeah. Yep. And I'm sure we were townies to them, so,
But the truth is that so many of them now live and work, and like their families live and work in the communities off base. There's only about 13 or 14% that live on base.
Yeah.
The rest are members of
the community,
of the Simcoe County community.
Speaking of members of the community, thank you so much for coming out to Epiphanies.
Thank you for having me.
I've really enjoyed this, and I just want to say that we have been talking about Teardown, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up by Dave Meslin. Thank you, Jennifer. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Epiphanies.